When you go into no contact, most men believe they're creating distance to make her miss them. But what actually happens on a deeper level is something very different. No contact doesn't remove her feelings, it removes her emotional control. And that loss of control is what triggers testing, not indifference. Before no contact, the emotional dynamic is usually predictable. She knows when you'll respond. She knows how you'll react. She knows where your emotional center sits in relation to her. That predictability gives her comfort, even if she's pulling away. The moment you remove yourself emotionally, that predictability disappears. And when predictability disappears, the emotional system reacts. This is where many men misunderstand what tests really are. Tests are not signs of cruelty or games. They are attempts to regain emotional certainty. When you step back, her mind doesn't immediately think, "I'm done." It thinks, "Something changed." And the emotional system needs to understand that change before it can relax again. Testing begins because she no longer knows where she stands with you emotionally. That uncertainty creates internal tension, and tension demands resolution. So she reaches out indirectly, changes tone, or creates emotional fluctuations to see what still moves you. Not because she wants attention, but because she wants information. Most men think tests mean interest is low. In reality, tests only happen when emotional relevance still exists. You don't test someone you're done with. You don't test someone who no longer matters. You test someone whose emotional position affects your own sense of control. No contact removes emotional leverage. That's the part that unsettles her. When your emotional availability disappears, the dynamic flips. She's no longer certain she can access you the same way. And when certainty disappears, the subconscious tries to restore it. This is why tests often look confusing. One moment she's warm, the next she's distant. One moment she reaches out, the next she pulls back. These shifts are not random, they are pressure checks. She's observing whether your emotional center has moved or if you're still anchored to the same reactive patterns. If your emotions are still easily triggered, tests succeed. She regains certainty. The emotional hierarchy resets back to where it was. But if your center has shifted, if you remain calm, grounded, and non-reactive, the test fails. And failure here is a good thing. When tests fail, something important happens internally. Her emotional system realizes it can't restore control the old way. And when control can't be restored, reevaluation begins. Reevaluation is where attraction stabilizes again. Men often think they need to respond perfectly during tests. But tests aren't about words. They're about emotional movement. She's not listening for explanations. She's watching for reactions. A reaction gives her information. Composure gives her uncertainty. And uncertainty is what keeps attraction alive. Another mistake men make is assuming tests are personal. They're not. Tests are reflexive. They are the emotional system trying to regain balance after a shift. The more personally you take them, the more likely you are to react emotionally, and reaction is exactly what the test is designed to provoke. No contact works when it changes you, not when it's used as a tactic. If you disappear physically but remain emotionally centered on her reactions, tests will pull you right back into chasing. But if no contact creates internal stability, tests lose their power. This is why emotional restraint matters more than silence. Silence without stability feels tense. Stability without reaction feels strong, and strength changes how tests are interpreted internally. When she can no longer predict how you'll respond emotionally, she has to reassess the dynamic. And reassessment is the doorway to respect returning. Respect doesn't come from availability. It comes from emotional independence. So when testing begins after no contact, don't see it as regression. See it as proof that something shifted. The old emotional structure no longer works. And once that structure collapses, something new can form. Because tests don't happen when attraction is gone. They happen when control is gone, and control leaving is where real change begins. After no contact, when she starts testing you, it's not because she suddenly wants attention. It's because she wants clarity about something much deeper, your emotional center. She's trying to figure out whether your silence was real growth or just temporary distance. And the only way she can know that is by applying pressure. Before no contact, your emotional responses likely followed a familiar pattern. She knew what would get a reaction. She knew what tone would pull you closer. She knew how much access she had to your emotional state. That familiarity gave her certainty. When no contact breaks that pattern, certainty disappears. And when certainty disappears, the emotional system seeks proof. That proof isn't verbal. She's not asking you directly if you've changed. She's watching how you move when she re-enters your space. Does your energy shift instantly? Do you lean in? Do you explain yourself? Do you over-respond? Or do you remain grounded, measured, and self-contained? This is the core of the test. She's checking whether your emotional foundation has actually shifted or whether you're still anchored to her reactions. If your center is still tied to her behavior, she'll feel it immediately. Emotional dependency is sensed, not heard. Most men fail this stage because they think responding equals strength. They believe being attentive, warm, or expressive proves confidence. But confidence isn't emotional output, it's emotional stability. The man who hasn't changed reacts quickly. The man who has changed responds calmly. Testing often shows up as mixed signals because mixed signals create emotional imbalance. A warm message followed by distance. A casual check-in followed by silence. These are not accidents. They're designed to see if emotional turbulence still pulls you off center. If it does, the test answers itself. She learns that no contact didn't change the emotional structure, it only paused it. And when that happens, attraction doesn't rebuild. The dynamic simply resets to what it was before. But if your center has shifted, something different happens. The mixed signal doesn't create urgency. The silence doesn't trigger anxiety. The warmth doesn't pull you forward emotionally. You remain consistent, and consistency is disruptive to old patterns. When she can't pull you into emotional reaction, uncertainty grows on her side instead of yours. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for the person who once had emotional leverage. That discomfort forces reevaluation. Men often misunderstand reevaluation. They think it means she's deciding whether she likes them again. It's deeper than that. She's reassessing how she feels around you, whether the emotional environment has changed, whether reconnecting would feel safe, stable, and balanced now. This is why chasing after no contact is so damaging. Chasing answers the test immediately. It tells her that your emotional center hasn't moved, and once she knows that there's nothing left to discover. Passing the test doesn't require coldness, it requires restraint. You don't punish her with distance. You don't flood her with emotion. You meet interaction with calm presence. That balance communicates growth without words. Another mistake men make is trying to prove change through explanation. But change doesn't need justification. Explaining yourself puts you back into a defensive position, and defense signals insecurity, not evolution. True emotional growth shows up as emotional neutrality. You're open but not eager, engaged but not dependent, present but not waiting. That emotional posture is unfamiliar to her, and unfamiliarity reignites attention. This is also where respect begins to return. Respect isn't built through effort. It's built through boundaries and self-regulation. When she sees that her behavior no longer dictates your emotional state, she has to relate to you differently. So when she tests you after no contact, understand what's really being measured, not your interest, not your words, your emotional position. And when your center has truly shifted, the test doesn't pull you back into chasing, it pulls her into reassessing the connection instead. After no contact, one of the most confusing things a man experiences is mixed signals. One moment she seems warm, curious, even open. The next moment she pulls back, goes quiet, or becomes distant again. Most men assume this means she's unsure, conflicted, or playing games. But mixed signals are rarely confusion. They are pressure tests designed to see if you'll abandon your emotional frame and chase clarity. When no contact shifts the dynamic, it removes her certainty about your emotional position, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. So instead of asking directly where you stand, she creates emotional contrast. Warmth followed by distance, availability followed by silence. These contrasts are not random. They are intentional emotional stimuli meant to provoke movement. The purpose of mixed signals is simple, to see if you still need reassurance. When the dynamic was predictable, she didn't need to test. She already knew what would happen. But when your emotional center becomes less accessible, she needs data, and emotional reactions are the fastest way to gather it. This is where most men fail without realizing it. They see warmth and lean in emotionally. They see distance and rush to restore connection. They explain, they check in, they ask what's wrong. In doing so, they answer the test immediately. They reveal that uncertainty still controls them. Chasing clarity feels logical to the anxious mind. But emotionally, clarity kills attraction. Attraction thrives in balance, not reassurance. The moment you try to stabilize the emotional environment for her, you destabilize yourself. and she feels that shift instantly. Mixed signals work because they create emotional imbalance. They activate fear of loss, hope of reconnection, and urgency all at once. And if your emotional foundation isn't solid, those signals pull you out of your frame fast. But if your emotional center is grounded, mixed signals lose their power. Warmth doesn't inflate you. Distance doesn't deflate you. You remain consistent. And consistency is disruptive to emotional testing. What happens internally for her when this occurs is critical. When mixed signals fail to move you, the emotional leverage she once had stops working. She can no longer pull certainty from your reactions. And when leverage disappears, the testing escalates or stops. Either way, the old dynamic can't continue. Men often think they need to respond correctly to mixed signals, but there is no correct response in words. The response is emotional posture, calm pacing, no urgency, no overinvestment, no withdrawal. This doesn't mean ignoring her or becoming cold. It means not letting emotional contrast dictate your behavior. You engage when it feels natural, you disengage when it feels forced, and you do both without emotional charge. Another mistake men make is assuming mixed signals are a green light to pursue harder. They think warmth means opportunity. But opportunity without stability leads back to imbalance. Pursuit tells her that mixed signals still control your emotional state. When you don't chase clarity, something powerful happens. She begins chasing internal clarity instead. She starts questioning why you're no longer reacting the way she expects. That questioning turns inward. And inward questioning is where attraction rebuilds. Mixed signals are also a way to test boundaries. She's checking whether access to you still comes easily or whether it's now regulated by your own self-respect. Boundaries don't need to be announced. They're felt through behavior. If you stay emotionally steady, mixed signals become uncomfortable for her instead of you. The emotional pressure reverses, and pressure always seeks release. This is why men who pass this stage often say reconnection felt sudden. From the outside, it looks like nothing happened. Internally, the emotional dynamic was shifting the entire time. So when mixed signals appear after no contact, don't read them as confusion. Read them as evaluation. She's testing whether you'll chase certainty or remain centered. And when you remain centered, the test stops working and attraction begins reorganizing itself around you instead. When she reaches out after no contact, it often doesn't look dramatic or emotional. It's subtle, casual, almost familiar, a simple message, an inside joke, a comment that feels light and effortless. And that's exactly the point. She's not testing you with intensity, she's testing you with familiarity. Emotional familiarity is powerful because it bypasses logic. It reaches straight into old habits, old roles, and old patterns. She's not trying to reconnect fully in that moment. She's trying to see if she can still access the version of you that responded automatically. Before no contact, familiarity meant safety. It meant she knew how you'd show up emotionally, how quickly you'd engage, how deeply you'd lean in. Familiarity gave her emotional leverage without effort. So after no contact disrupts that leverage, the emotional system reaches for what used to work. This is why the message feels casual. If she came in heavy, it would reveal intention. Casual contact keeps the power dynamic unclear. It allows her to observe without exposing herself. And observation is the goal. Men often misinterpret this stage. They think casual equals low interest or harmless interaction. But casual familiarity is one of the most effective tests because it doesn't trigger defenses. It feels natural, and what feels natural invites old behavior. The test is simple. Will you step back into the same emotional role without resistance? Will you respond with the same energy, availability, and emotional openness as before? If you do, the test answers itself. Familiarity is designed to collapse the distance no contact created, not physically, but emotionally. If she can pull you back into old rhythms, the dynamic resets without needing a conversation. This is where emotional discipline matters most. You don't need to be distant or cold, but you do need to be aware. Awareness keeps familiarity from turning into emotional regression. Responding warmly isn't the problem. Responding automatically is. Automatic responses signal unchanged emotional positioning. They tell her that no contact didn't create growth, it only created absence. When your emotional center has shifted, familiarity feels different on your side too. You're present but not pulled, engaged but not eager, calm not reactive. That difference is felt immediately. Another mistake men make is overcorrecting. They sense the test and become overly guarded, dry, or distant. That creates tension and breaks natural flow. Tests aren't passed through resistance. They're passed through grounded presence. You don't reject familiarity, you regulate it. You don't rush to re-establish closeness. You allow interaction to unfold at a natural pace without emotional acceleration. What she's watching is subtle. She's noticing response timing, emotional tone, energy consistency. She's checking whether she still sets the emotional tempo or whether you now move at your own rhythm. If familiarity doesn't give her emotional certainty, curiosity increases. Curiosity keeps her engaged without forcing her to decide anything yet, and curiosity is a sign that emotional relevance still exists. This stage is also where many men unintentionally sabotage progress by bringing up the past. Familiarity can make things feel safe enough to explain, apologize, or revisit old wounds. But reopening the past pulls the dynamic backward. Growth doesn't need explanation. Emotional maturity is demonstrated through calm consistency, not emotional processing on demand. When familiarity no longer triggers old patterns, she experiences a subtle loss of control again. But this time, it's different. She's already reached out. She's already re-engaged. And now she's realizing the dynamic didn't reset the way she expected. That realization creates internal tension. And internal tension leads to increased investment, more effort, more engagement, more emotional presence. So when familiar contact shows up after no contact, don't see it as casual. See it as diagnostic. She's testing whether the emotional door still opens the same way. And when it doesn't, the old dynamic stays closed, making space for a new one to form. After no contact, one of the fastest ways men destroy progress is by chasing. And they don't do it because they're weak. They do it because tests create emotional pressure, and pressure makes the old instincts come back online. The problem is that chasing doesn't just slow attraction down, it reverses it completely. No contact creates polarity. It reintroduces space, mystery, and emotional independence. That polarity is what shifts the emotional dynamic in the first place. The moment you chase, that polarity collapses. And when polarity collapses, attraction follows it down. Chasing doesn't mean sending 10 messages or begging. It can be subtle, over-explaining your intentions, seeking reassurance, trying to fix the emotional atmosphere, asking where things are going. Any behavior rooted in emotional urgency counts as chasing. What most men don't realize is that tests are designed to invite chasing. Mixed signals, silence, casual reach outs, all of them create discomfort. And the fastest way to relieve discomfort is pursuit. But relief for you becomes certainty for her, and certainty kills attraction. When you chase after no contact, you communicate one thing clearly: your emotional center never moved. You're still oriented around her reactions. And once she senses that, the emotional hierarchy resets to the old structure. Attraction doesn't grow where emotional dependency exists. It grows where emotional self-sufficiency is felt. Chasing signals that your sense of stability depends on her response. Even if your words sound confident, the emotional energy underneath tells the truth. This is why reassurance seeking is so damaging. When you ask for clarity, you're not just asking a question, you're handing over emotional authority. You're saying, I need your response to feel settled. And once she has that authority again, the test is over. Men often justify chasing by saying they're being mature or communicative, but communication without emotional balance becomes emotional labor for her. She doesn't feel pulled closer, she feels responsible. Responsibility drains attraction. It creates pressure instead of desire. Another trap is thinking effort rebuilds attraction. Effort rebuilds comfort, not polarity. Comfort alone doesn't create desire. Desire requires emotional tension, and tension only exists when both people are emotionally grounded. When you chase, you remove tension. You smooth everything out. You make the emotional environment predictable again. And predictability is exactly what no contact disrupted in the first place. The irony is that chasing feels like control, but it's actually surrender. You surrender your emotional position in exchange for temporary relief, and that relief costs you long-term leverage. Men who pass this stage don't do anything dramatic. They don't withdraw aggressively. They don't punish. They simply stop chasing emotional outcomes. They let interaction unfold without trying to steer it. This calm non-attachment is unsettling in a good way. It forces her to invest emotionally instead of reacting automatically. And investment is what rebuilds attraction. When you don't chase, something shifts internally for her. She starts wondering why the emotional pressure isn't being relieved. Why you're not asking questions. Why you're not trying to pull her closer. That curiosity turns into engagement. This doesn't mean you ignore her or act indifferent. It means you remain open without being needy. interested without being urgent, present without being dependent. Chasing after no contact doesn't prove confidence. It proves emotional hunger, and emotional hunger pushes attraction away. So if you want the dynamic to move forward instead of backward, restraint isn't weakness, it's leadership. And leadership is felt long before it's understood. When you stop chasing emotional certainty, attraction finally has room to move toward you instead. After no contact, the biggest misconception men have is believing that passing her tests requires doing something. Saying the right words, showing the right amount of interest, timing responses perfectly. But the truth is, tests aren't passed through action, they're passed through restraint. Restraint doesn't mean emotional shutdown. It doesn't mean being cold, distant, or unavailable. It means regulating your emotional output so that it's no longer reactive. And non-reactivity is one of the most powerful signals of emotional maturity there is. When she tests you, she's watching for movement. Not physical movement, emotional movement. She's observing whether her behavior still dictates your internal state. Does silence make you anxious? Does warmth pull you forward? Does distance trigger urgency? Those reactions used to give her emotional certainty. Restraint removes that certainty. Most men fail this stage because they confuse restraint with suppression. They bottle everything up, thinking silence alone is strength. But suppressed emotion leaks out through tone, pacing, and overcompensation. True restraint feels calm, not tense. Passing the test means staying emotionally clean. You don't need to match her energy. You don't need to resist it either. You simply stay grounded in your own rhythm. This is why composure matters more than confidence. Confidence can be performative. Composure is felt, and composure can't be faked for long. When restraint is present, her emotional system begins recalibrating. The old tools stop working. The mixed signals don't create reaction. The familiarity doesn't pull you back. The silence doesn't destabilize you. At that point, something important happens. She stops testing and starts observing. Observation is different. Testing seeks reaction. Observation seeks understanding. And understanding is where respect forms. Men often think respect comes from dominance or distance. In reality, respect comes from self-regulation, from knowing you don't need to react to feel secure. Restraint also signals selectivity. You're not emotionally available on demand, not because you're withholding, but because your emotional energy is governed by self-respect. This is where attraction deepens. Attraction doesn't need to be chased. It needs space to move, and restraint creates that space. Another mistake men make is thinking restraint will make them boring or passive. In reality, it makes them unpredictable in a healthy way. When reactions stop being automatic, interest increases. Restraint also prevents regression. Without it, even a small interaction can pull you back into old roles. With it, every interaction builds on the new dynamic instead of erasing it. This is how polarity stabilizes, not through effort, not through persuasion, through presence. When she feels that your emotional state is no longer dependent on her responses, safety returns in a new form, not the safety of predictability, but the safety of balance. And balance is what allows reconnection to happen without power struggles. Men who reach this stage often notice something subtle. She starts initiating more, asking questions, opening emotionally. The tests fade because they're no longer needed. And when tests disappear, it's not because attraction died, it's because attraction no longer needs to protect itself. So if you're in no contact and testing begins, don't look for a move to make. Look for a state to maintain, because the man who doesn't react isn't weak, he's centered. And center is where attraction naturally returns.